Hey everyone, before we get to today's episode, I wanted to share what I think is a pretty exciting announcement. We are opening up our Rival AMP community. So some of you listening have been part of AMP from the beginning of the company. It has been our small, very small friends and family community around Rival where we post updates, ask for feedback, kind of share what's going on in the business. But actually, we think there's a lot more potential as we've grown, as our community has grown, as we've met more of you, to actually build and scale a proper community within Rival AMP. So what Rival AMP is going to be is it's going to be a community for challenger marketers on WhatsApp. We're going to share ideas and observations from the challenger marketing world that we see and ask everyone to contribute to that, share about challenger brands, marketing news, industry events, job opportunities, ask for feedback and input, use each other as a sounding board. We think it's going to be really great. So if you are interested in joining and are not already a member, please either reach out to me if you know me or go on over to our website, wearerival.com, and you can apply from there. This is free, but we do want to make sure that we're adding people that are really interested and can really add value. That's it. On to the episode.
Yeah, so I think, about 80% of our orders are repeat. So we really want to think about ways that we can show up better for our customers, be even more useful to them. How can we serve more customers more often for more occasions, more recipients, and really drive that frequency over the long term? And so where we see the big opportunity is from shifting from being a flower gifting brand to a broader gifting brand. And so we have spent a lot of time over the past sort of 6-9 months thinking about, okay, well, what is it about our existing kind of flower gifting proposition that people really, really value? And how can we translate that into broader categories that will fuel that business growth for the next decade?
I'm Eric Fulweiler, and this is Scratch, bringing you marketing lessons from the leading brands and brains, rewriting the rulebook from scratch for the world of today. Hey everyone, great episode for you today with Charlotte Langley, who is the Chief Customer Officer at Bloom & Wild. If you live in the UK, I'm sure you know about Bloom & Wild. They pioneered the letterbox, mailbox, flower delivery category as a challenger 10 years ago, and now as a true rival within the category with 20 million deliveries to date. 100,000 5-star reviews. They've raised 140 million in venture funding, have started to make some acquisitions. So they're definitely making that pivot and evolution from a challenger brand to a true rival. So really interesting conversation with Charlotte, starting with talking about her role as Chief Customer Officer and how that's set up. I think there's some interesting angles and takeaways for people from that, and just the role of marketing within an organization, and also how to structure the marketing teams. And then we go into really a two-part conversation. The first being about what are the principles and practices that have driven the success of Bloom & Wild over these first 10 years? And how is Charlotte and the executive team thinking about the strategy and the roadmap for the next 10 years? So I'll leave you to it. Please enjoy my conversation with Charlotte Langley. Hey, Charlotte, thanks so much for making the time. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I am good. I really like your background. I know Viren was commenting on it before we press record, but for those who are listening and not watching, you have a very on-brand background with the pictures. Or are those prints? Those are just pictures of flowers, right?
Yeah. They're just they're pictures of our beautiful bouquets behind me.
Amazing. Well, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. As I said, when I reached out, Bloom & Wild has been on our wish list for a while, but also personally, I've been a customer in the past. My sister actually uses you for all of her kind of occasions and gifting. And I can say this because this episode won't come out until after the event, but I actually just bought a subscription, a gift subscription for our operations director because it's her birthday coming up next week. So I've had a lot of firsthand experience with the brand and business. All right. So let's get into it. We have a lot of amazing topics to cover from our prep call last week. But to start off the conversation, the question that we ask every guest, what is one challenger brand that you're very passionate about right now and why?
So I am currently pregnant. So looking for nice drinks is a real passion. I would normally have a glass of wine or two, which is one of the harder elements of being pregnant, not to be able to enjoy that with friends. So I've been looking for proper grown up drinks that aren't too sweet. And there are obviously loads of brands now doing non-alcoholic spirits, but I really love one called Pentire. It's a brand which is kind of inspired by the sea, so it's all about coastal living, and they use kind of plants and botanics that grow around the sea. I think it's a Cornwall-based brand, and it tastes amazing. It's a really grown-up looking product. The branding is beautiful. They have a lovely brand story, good sustainability credentials, and it's the closest thing I'm going to get to Negroni for a while. So I'm feeling pretty passionate about that.
Well, first and foremost, congratulations. And also, I'm fascinated by the non-alcoholic adult beverage category. I don't even know what they call it, but obviously you see all this non-alcoholic beer. I think I've even seen non-alcoholic wine at times. And for me personally, I mean, obviously, I don't have the situation that you do, but I'm like, I'm not sure I really see the point. But it's exploding. Clearly there's demand. Clearly there are people who, for whatever the situation or whatever the need is, I see a lot of advertising for non-alcoholic beer that's kind of focused around have a beer, but don't regret it tomorrow, or don't have to sacrifice tomorrow, or things like that. So I think academically as a marketer, it is a fascinating category.
And I mean, I would genuinely have one of these, non-alcoholic spirits like midweek, in place of a gin and tonic or something like that, just because you don't really need that on a Wednesday, but you get that feeling. There's like something cultural about wanting to mark the end of your day with something that's a bit out of the ordinary and not just a glass of water. So I think there's a real role for them. So yeah, it's a exploding space, as you say.
Cool. All right, so let's dig in to Bloom and Wild, and we're going to start by talking a little bit about, you're celebrating your 10-year anniversary as a business. Obviously, you've covered a ton of ground from where you started. So I do want to talk about that journey as a successful challenger brand and how the company has done that and how you've contributed to doing that over the 3 years that you've been there. But the place I want to start, because I think it's important to give the audience some context, is can you just give an overview of your role? So obviously, Chief Customer Officer, which is something I think you see more and more of, but you're set up overseeing most of marketing, but not all of marketing, and also some other remits within the business, I think is really interesting and important to understand before we go into the story of the brand and business.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, Chief Customer Officer, and I suppose I see myself as kind of the champion of the customer and their experience in the business and at exec level. And so I'm always asking, why would they care about whatever this thing is that we're planning to do? How can we be more useful to them? How can we be more compelling and like a more welcome part of their life? So at a kind of top line level, that's why I'm here. And yeah, in terms of the teams I look after, so I look after all of brand, creative, comms, our physical product range, and our customer insights as well. So it's quite broad. It's not just about making ads or designing emails. It's really about crafting those sort of compelling brand experiences. And often, whenever I was doing an intro to my teams yesterday for some new starters, and I always say to them, but it's about doing that to drive business growth. Because I think sometimes when people hear that you cover creative, they're like, oh, cool, the coloring in department. And that's just not at all what we do. So we really think about shaping the experience for the customer. And I think it's really important that we've connected those teams together to ensure that you get that sort of seamless innovation. So there's, no point having just our range team work on a product collaboration, because then the communications won't match up, or just our brand team say we want to partner with this brand and not trying to connect it to our product. So, and not having any insights around that. So we can really build, that's one example of product collaborations where we can build that based on insight. It can be beautifully designed and packaged, and really creatively communicated as well. So what I don't look after is the day-to-day performance marketing and the trading. And I suppose my background is not in growth marketing, as so many tech sort of enabled businesses, are focused on. And so what this kind of allows is that there's like some teams which are really focused on that, and a lot of of course, they're looking at long-term strategic things, but it's big focus on the day-to-day. Whereas my teams can be thinking longer term. They can be thinking about those longer-term strategic goals for the business and for the brands that we have. So it works quite nicely. And of course, we're super connected with those teams which are more based around trading and delivering the numbers day in, day out. And we produce a lot of creative for those teams as well. But I think having this sort of holistic view of like, how does the customer experience everything that we offer them, makes it much more seamless.
So one of the things that I think about is I think that the companies that are more long-term oriented are always in a better position to win, because what that means is that you're more focused on delivering on the needs of the customer, even if it doesn't deliver on the needs of the business immediately or short term. But of course, particularly as companies scale, there starts to be more of a focus on the bottom line. There is that balance of delivering the numbers while building the runway for future growth. So how does that dynamic work? Do you own a revenue target within the business? Does that sit with someone else?
Yeah, so I suppose because I sit on the exec team, like we all collectively own our business targets. There's 6 of us on that team, all the kind of chief everybody for the various areas. And so whilst it's not like, my P&L to own specifically or my number, I think there's that collective ownership, and like we need to make decisions on our strategy together that are going to prioritize the right things. Right now, our focus is very much on profitability, but we're in a fortunate position whereby we've got a very, very strong core business in the UK where we can reinvest into future growth engines, whether that be new initiatives for the UK or into our international markets and brands, for example. So you're right, it's always a balance, but I think having a very strong core allows you to also think about investing for the future. But if you haven't got your core really solid and got your unit economics really working there, then you're going to have trouble being future facing.
Yep. And so for you, knowing a bit about your background, you're at L'Oreal, you're in the beauty world as a brand manager, which of course within the big CPG businesses has more responsibility than just marketing. But I'm curious, overseeing product, the physical product line and new product development, has that been a learning curve for you? How have you thought about kind of approaching that part of the role? And actually, as part of that conversation, was the role always structured this way when they reached out to you or you got in touch with them when you started interviewing, or was this something that you kind of pushed for?
Yeah, so it wasn't structured this way when I started. So I started January 2020, and I came in as brand and communications director. Aaron actually tried to offer me brand and creative director, and I was like, I'm not a creative director. I'm not taking that title. So we shaped a new title for me. And then as I've gone along, I've basically collected other teams. So, as is the way in any fast-growing business, things change really quickly. People move around and all of that kind of stuff. So I've kind of gathered, started with brand and creative, and then I've gathered in the insights and the product range part of things over time. I suppose in terms of the learning around product range, I do think my time at L'Oreal was super helpful here. So whilst I wasn't responsible for product development that was happening in our sort of global hubs in Paris and New York, we were always interacting with them and saying, okay, actually in the UK, we have a gap in our portfolio for an eyeliner that is at about £5.99 price point and is liquid, not pencil and whatever. So it gets very technical. But so I think I had that. I was fortunate to have had that experience. And also, at L'Oreal, the marketing teams were responsible for setting pricing or recommended pricing. So, and that is now something which we've been doing a lot of focus on over the past year at Bloom & Wild. And so again, I kind of had that experience of recommending a price based on what a customer is prepared to pay and what else is in the market, and agreeing that with finance based on, what gross margin that's going to give you and all of that kind of stuff. So there are of course new elements, but I'm always look back on that time at a big kind of CPG company and think it really set me up well because, as you say, they do give you a broad remit. So even if you're not completely expert, you've got enough to draw on.
Yeah, I really agree. And that's come up in a lot of the conversations and interviews that I've done with CMOs or CXOs that have come from kind of particularly the big CPG background, the Procters, the Unilevers, the PepsiCos, the L'Oreals. And I do think that's important for people as they're thinking about building their marketing career. You need a broad base, whether that is more commercial experience, more product experience, widening that foundation. I don't know the sequence of when these episodes are going to come out, but the last recording I did was with Martin Lindstrom. And one of the things that he's passionate about is kind of the role of the CMO and how it's not respected in a lot of organizations. And his big thing when I asked him, what's the thing to do to be more respected was essentially this: you got to broaden the base of kind of your skill set and your experience to include more of a commercial understanding so that you can bring that to the table. And I think that's so key.
Yeah, and the commercial understanding is exactly it. And I actually started out my career in commercial at L'Oreal. So I was negotiating with like Tesco and things like that. So that's super important, and speaking the language of everybody else on your, exec or your board. So, what is the return on what you're doing, and, how are you impacting profitability and margins, et cetera, and really trying to bring those things together.
And I do think, sometimes I say the role of marketing is to make the company more customer centric. I really think that at the C-suite level, it is the CMO's, remit to be the voice of the customer, to bring the customer into the conversations internally. I mean, I think with good and successful businesses, everybody is doing that. But really, the CMO is kind of the bridge between what's happening internally, the value that the product or service can offer, and what the needs are in the market and how those are changing. And so I think it's really interesting explicitly making that chief customer officer. But I think for people listening, even if you aren't chief customer officer, if you are CMO, or if you are senior marketer, I think what you just talked about, and obviously what we're going to get into in terms of how you've delivered on that so far in your role is really important. So let's start talking about Bloom & Wild. So 10 years on, 20 million deliveries to date, over 100,000 five-star reviews, raised 140 million pounds to date from some of the world's top VCs. So there's a whole list of accolades and stats that I could share, and I'm sure people can look up about the success of Bloom & Wild as a challenger brand. And I guess the broad question, depending on the direction that you want to take it, is what has contributed to this success? Are there certain principles and practices that you can draw out and share that you think have been kind of those 20/80, those most important things that have delivered so much of this growth?
Yeah, I think if we go back to 2013 when Aaron and Ben founded Bloom & Wild, there were really no loved brands in this space. And Google was basically everybody's favorite flower brand because they just went online and typed in flower delivery and kind of hoped for the best. And the sort of category NPS was and still is about 0, which is really poor. And so actually what we came in and did is said, okay, well, let's just really focus on making this an excellent experience. Because, Aaron, it came from Aaron being like getting on a flight, trying to send some flowers to somebody who'd hosted him and finding it really difficult to do. And he just thought, like, this is crazy. This really shouldn't be this difficult. And we should be able to, find something that is to my taste, to the recipient's taste, feels premium and has a great experience and all of that stuff. So we obviously started with a big innovation, which was letterbox flowers. And that really came from an insight around the supply chain, which is that across the world, flowers are actually shipped flat pack. So you obviously, when you go to a florist, you see them in a bouquet, but that's not the way that they travel around before they are made up that way. And so Aaron kind of thought, hang on a minute, maybe there's something we can do here. And so we created the letterbox flowers, which did a couple of things. One meant that because you're able to skip a step in the supply chain, and we were going direct to growers as well, so we actually cut out multiple steps in the supply chain. When the flowers arrive, they're way fresher. And so they last way longer. And so people are always amazed. They're like, oh my God, my flowers are still going 2-3 weeks on from having received them. So that's your first like nugget of, okay, we've really managed to change the customer experience here. But the other thing, excuse me, that the letterbox did was actually change behavior, or kind of allowed a behavior to scale, which was you didn't have to send flowers anymore for a big, flashy, showy gesture. You could just send them, to your best friend as a small birthday gift, or to someone is having a bit of a tough week, or has not been well. And so this sort of just because gifting, we like to call it, really scaled and changing. And actually, it's very female to female what we do. So I think about 80% of our gifting is female to female. So that's very different from a category that was kind of focused on these sort of big romantic gestures, if you see what I mean. So that was the beginning of the story. But as I say, we really obsessed about the details. So, we've got quality is there, longevity is there, but we also pay massive attention to the unboxing experience and the sort of care advice that we give people for their flowers. So everything comes with a care guide, which tells you how to look after them best. We send 2 sachets of flower food, not 1, so that they'll last longer. Just small, tiny things like that, which make a really big difference. And then over time, because we have this culture of, well, how can we make this experience better? We really developed, I think, best-in-class customer service. And we frequently get people writing into us saying how amazing the service has been, or tweeting us or whatever. And that is powered by data. And I think that is different from what many kind of brands in this space are able to do. So we're constantly collecting anything that comes in through our we call it customer delight rather than customer service. So it gives you a sort of sense of culturally how we think about it. So we're constantly collecting that data, and it goes through something called Qualbot, and we are able to see patterns and be like, okay, this one bouquet, there's like a consistent recurring problem with these stems or something. So we can go into the warehouse and be like, pull them out, change something, and make sure the experience is better for the next customer. Equally, like around Mother's Day, we track all of this sounds kind of crazy, and I couldn't believe it when I joined the company, but we track with our couriers where the delivery is, and we can spot where we think it might be late. And if we think it might be late for a big occasion like Mother's Day, we just proactively resend it. And we just send them a message saying, hey, we think your flowers might be late. We sent you another one. If you get 2, no problem, enjoy them both. But it means that kind of generosity, and it powered by being really on top of the data, people are just blown away by that level of service. And that is really like embedded in our DNA as a business. So I think that's sort of really step changing the experience in a category where it was quite dated and out of step with what people expect now, especially from online brands, was a really important part of the journey. And there's loads more I can say, but I'm sure we'll get onto it.
Yeah, and clearly that's been successful, as evidence not just in the growth of the business, but also one of the stats that you mentioned in our prep call is that 50% of new customers come from basically receiving it as a gift and then deciding that they want to send it to somebody else, which I think is amazing as an acquisition channel. I think a lot of businesses would love to be in that spot. I think the thing I'd love to follow up on as a question is going back to our conversation about being more long-term oriented, focusing on the customer, drilling down specifically into that customer delighting policy, which I love. And sometimes I think there's so much opportunity just in, so many industries have such crap experiences where people they expect the bare minimum. And just going a little bit above and beyond, or a lot above and beyond, as you're doing in many cases, can have such a huge impact on people's experience and therefore their, interest and willingness to repurchase and be an advocate and referrals and all that stuff. But I guess specifically with like the delighting policy or resending flowers, is there like a process around that? Like, do you have a budget that you draw down from for resending flowers or surprise and delights to customers? Or do you just have the remit and I guess buy-in from the CEO and the organization to just be like, I think this is the right thing to do?
Yes, it's kind of a mixture. We obviously do budget what we think our like resends will amount to, but the customer delight teams are empowered to make that call. And obviously there's, we have things in place which sometimes people call us. So for example, because we send the flowers very fresh, they are more often than not in bud when they first arrive. And so sometimes people can say, oh, my flowers don't look great. And so we'll, first of all, obviously give them some advice and say, oh, don't worry, pop them into water in the morning, they'll start to bloom. And more often than not, everyone's like, oh, you were absolutely right, they look beautiful today. So, there are obviously things in place to make sure that we're only, refunding, resending when it's really necessary. But I do know that, I sit on the customer, we all as a company get on our customer delight channels at Mother's Day, for example. So I'll sit there emailing customers who've got a problem, and it's a great way to connect with what's going on. And I never feel like I'm not able to just make the call. And, I clearly have zero proper training, but that's what we're, told to do is, this is a policy. If you see a photo, you don't think it looks right, you do what you think is the right thing. And also you write back to them in a way that, acknowledges there's no set sort of template. Clearly we have things to speed stuff up, and yes, you can copy and paste stuff, but we're always asking people to say, okay, just acknowledge, like, I'm so sorry to hear that your mum's unwell. Of course we'll fix it for you, rather than just the standard response. So I think, yes, you empower the teams, but also we look at we have looked in the past at the LTV of this kind of policy, and it pays back. Because as you say, if you give someone an excellent experience and you turn around a bad experience, there's real long-term business value to that. So there's a little bit of like heart and economics going on there, I suppose.
So building on that, actually, because the next thing I wanted to dig into is you've talked a bit now, and we talked a lot in the prep call about kind of insights-driven activations, planning, and the focus on research. And I know I was trying to check my notes. I think there's 3 people that are full-time dedicated to research within the team, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. And I know that we share a partner in Attest in terms of the customer research and how we do it. But to your point of heart and science, one of the other things that you said on our prep call that I really liked was sometimes we just launch it and see what happens. And so what is the balance for you between being data-driven, asking the customer what they want to see, and being idea-led, coming up with something that you think is right, let's just ship it and then figure it out or evolve it from there?
Yeah, I mean, I think we always try and do some due diligence, but you're never, especially when you are like evolving a product range, a customer is hardly ever going to be able to tell you exactly what they want. So you have to make something and then see if it's what they want. So I suppose like a good example is so last autumn, I challenged the team. We had cost of living was really top of everybody's mind, still is for many, many people. And I wanted us to have a product offering that was below £20. And so the team managed to turn something around in about 4 weeks. Clearly, we didn't have time to do a lot of research there, but also like, do you need to do a lot of research there? You need to get a cheaper product in your range. Kind of how much you can afford to give people at that price point. So let's just get something out and see how it does. And actually there, as I say, we got this product live within about 4 weeks. And we've seen that it is, driving conversion in a group where we would have lost that conversion previously. And so we've obviously tested that. And then we've made some refinements. We had some issues with one of the colorways, the stems weren't quite right, et cetera. But the most important thing was to have something there so that we could try and sort of bank that conversion opportunity and make sure that we're hitting that and not losing customers at a time where price is really important. So sometimes I think you just know that you need to do something. And it's, when it's launching a product like that, it's very easy to then quickly optimize it afterwards. And in fact, we've then sort of seen other brands copy and launch their own versions and things like that. So you have to continually evolve. And that involves both doubling down on what's working, but also kind of pulling back on what's not. And so I did want to touch on
I know that you or Bloom and Wild had expanded into retail, into bricks and mortar, which of course a lot of e-commerce C2C businesses are doing. And, a lot of the headlines in industry would say that that's kind of the playbook now, post iOS 14 and all that. You need both. You need to be omni-channel. But for Bloom and Wild, so you had a couple partnerships, you were in Sainsbury, and since then you've actually pulled out. So I'd love to talk about that as an example of how you tried something and ended up actually cutting it or moving away from it.
I think this is all about being clear in your objectives or something. So for us, Sainsbury's felt like a really good way to build that brand awareness in a physical environment. Good way for us to be able to have a physical manifestation of the brand without having to open our own stores. Good demographic overlap, etc., etc. And in many ways, like it worked well, and it gave us. We had amazing presence in the store. It looked great. And we were tracking what was the impact on awareness, and we were seeing halo uplifts in the areas around the stores. But there were also difficulties, right? So it's a supermarket that the supply chain and the stock there is really challenging, and because we had our brand name all over it everywhere, for us, it was really important that it looked great at all times. And it was just so difficult to make sure that happened because you're relying on store staff to put the right bouquets in the right buckets, and, on the bouquets to arrive at the right time so that they're always full, and et cetera, et cetera. So that was difficult. And then we saw kind of over time also that those halo effects on awareness were tailing off, because actually, yes, when you go into a store, lots of people go in and they see you and they're like, oh gosh, okay, that's interesting, Blue and Wild. But actually, if you think about where you do your supermarket shop, you tend to do it in the same store every week, right? So then the amount of new people who you're reaching over time kind of fell off. And also for us, we had to have different operational and some tech kind of integrations as well, which if you add all those things together and you think about, okay, well, what's the benefit we're getting as a business, and how much kind of time and effort and focus is it taking, and do those things stack up? At the time we made the decision to pull out, they didn't quite stack up in the way that we had thought they would, and so it made sense for us to, especially at a time where we wanted to focus, we knew we needed to head towards profitability, we just wanted to be focused on the most impactful things. And that was one of the things that was less impactful than some of the other things. So we pulled back. It's not to say that we wouldn't do something like that again. It's just that this phase of the business, it wasn't the right thing to continue spending dedicating a lot of team time to.
So let's shift gears. We've talked about the first 10 years. What about the next 10 years? How are you thinking about evolving the brand, the marketing function, the product roadmap to continue on this journey towards what we would call becoming a rival brand? So a challenger, someone who's trying to disrupt and change a category, and a rival brand is one who successfully has. So how are you thinking about that at a high level?
Yeah, so I think, about 80% of our orders are repeat. So we really want to think about ways that we can show up better for our customers, be even more useful to them. How can we serve more customers more often, for more occasions, more recipients, and really drive that frequency over the long term? And so where we see the big opportunity is from shifting from being a flower gifting brand to a broader gifting brand. And so we have spent a lot of time over the past sort of 6-9 months thinking about, okay, well, what is it about our existing kind of flower gifting proposition that people really, really value? And how can we translate that into broader categories that will fuel that business growth for the next decade? And there are a few things that have come out of our research here, which is quality is so key, and we are really trusted for that. And that we've got some really nice. I was watching some videos that the research team recorded last week with customers who were just so clearly able to articulate the kind of quality they would expect from us, and therefore the trust that drove, so that they would come to our site and say, yeah, I know if you're selling me something else like chocolate brownies or a candle, that you will have really thought about what is on your site because you've always done that. And I've never had a bad quality gift from you. So that quality is really, really key, from the product to the kind of unboxing experience that I talked about earlier. Even just the texture of the ribbon, the little stickers, all of that sort of stuff is really important to people. The other thing is that we know that our range is seen as unique. So it's one of our strongest brand perceptions currently. And so that's really helpful for us to say, okay, we need to think how we translate that as we expand. And so we think about how we can bring in maybe small maker brands that people can't necessarily shop easily elsewhere, that has that kind of uniqueness to it, alongside some brands that they'll know better. And then there's all of the stuff which is a bit more practical, but we have to kind of extend through. So how quick and easy it is to order, like the outstanding customer service we've been talking about, the fast, reliable delivery, all of that extends. So that's really where we're focused at the moment, is on thinking about how we can progress this evolution. And we've been testing since last September. And it's really encouraging that, and it's great to see that in our follow-up research, that these things are kind of stacking up to be true. So we've seen that people who would repurchase a non-flower gift are absolutely identifying those like aspects of the proposition that we thought were important as the reasons that they would buy again. And 93% of them said that they're, very likely or likely to buy again. So I think that is a really encouraging start. There's loads to do, not least thinking about the brand shift, because at the moment, it's very focused on our existing customers, and we're going to need to start to be known for more than just flower gifting. And that's quite a big challenge that is on my plate as we go into the next decade.
And so the product side of it is one thing. What is the natural extension, looking at the customer research, et cetera. But on the brand side of it, how are you thinking about evolving, or as I think you put it in our prep call, stretching the Bloom and Wild brands to have the permission to be not just a flower business, but an overall gifting business?
One of the things that's really important here is that we, back in 2020, we did a sort of full rebrand and positioning piece of work, all done over Zoom during COVID, which was its own challenge. And so we got really clear on who we are and developed a brand platform with our creative agency partners, the Or, which is Care Wildly. And the insight is really like, care is what drives this category. And that care between largely female to female recipients, as I mentioned, is not soft and sweet as it is often portrayed. It's strong, it's active, and there's a lot of emotion in there that you can play with. But because we've got this Care Wildly platform, it's a lot easier for us to stretch, because what we've gone for there is like, what is the like underlying emotional space that we're in and the insight for this category, rather than product attributes. Do you see what I mean? So we're fortunate that we'd already done that work. And so I can see how our creative, for example, and our communications are going to be able to evolve under that platform, because the sentiment is not going to change. So we are very focused in our brand communications about, why are you sending? What are you trying to communicate? And that will stretch, whether it's flowers or a candle or chocolates or whatever it might be. So that, I think, is really important, because if we were still in a space where we were just talking about the benefits of like flowers that go through the letterbox, the stretch would be much harder. So having done that groundwork as to like, who are we? Why do we exist? Why are we important for people? What is this emotional kind of transaction that we're supporting? That gives us the basis from which to grow and stretch.
Yeah. And I think the big kind of takeaway from me in this conversation is it sounds like everything that you're doing and driving as the chief customer officer is very intentional from a business standpoint, but it's very customer centric, and everybody says that. But the way that you've talked about everything in terms of the past and the future has been starting with an understanding of the perception and needs of the customer that you're trying to reach, and then finding a way to have that meet with what you want to do as a business. So that's going to be the thing that I walk away from this conversation with. Charlotte, are you up for a quick lightning round before we let you go?
Yes, I absolutely can do.
All right. So what is the biggest win that you've had recently?
So as a company, it's getting profitable in our first half of the year, really big achievement for everybody. And for my team and their contributions to that, like we've done some great work around value-based pricing and brand partnerships, driving up our AOV. So I can really see how they're contributing to that. So that feels like a big win. There are loads, but that feels like a really important one.
And what about the biggest struggle you've dealt with recently?
I mean, it's just always prioritizing all of the great ideas, all of the things you want to improve and make better, and you just cannot do it all at once. So it's a continual struggle, and I think a lot of CMOs will relate that you kind of want to overachieve, and you just have to sometimes be like, no, let's just focus on these things.
Sure, everybody can relate to that one. What is the best marketing resource that you've found recently?
So I got added to a sort of CMO WhatsApp group chat thing a few months ago. And actually that's great because...
It's not ours, is it?
It's not yours. Maybe I'm sure yours is also amazing. But that's very helpful because it's just constantly like questions that you might not even be thinking about, but just spark something, or very easy to get a little bit of perspective on things. So for me, more than any kind of tool or program or whatever, that sort of peer network support is really helpful.
Yeah. So Viren, we're gonna have to do some competitive research about this other CMO WhatsApp group. But just to build on that, I mean, ours kind of started organically. We had started a group that was, and obviously a bit of a plug for AMP for people listening if you haven't already joined, but we started it originally as just kind of like close friends and family of the business, people that we wanted to keep up to date about how things were going. And it just, naturally people started asking questions and sharing resources. And so we're like, hey, I think we've got something here. And so we opened it up a little bit, but I think with WhatsApp, because we're all part of different WhatsApp groups, it needs to be pretty cultivated and curated, and beyond about 150 people, which is where we're at, it gets a little bit unwieldy. But I've totally found, and I know I've heard from other people that are in it, that just kind of peer share conversation type of community is really valuable. So shout out for AMP and shout out for your other CMO community as well. All right. What is the biggest lesson that you've learned in your career?
I think it's got to be do the scary stuff. You asked me earlier, had I sort of done this, some of the aspects of this role before? And in some ways I had, but actually my role changes every 6 months, basically. There are so many things I've done in the last 3.5 years I've never done before. So you just have to back yourself and be like, I've worked it out before when I didn't really know what I was doing, and it feels a bit scary, but we're going to work it out. So do the scary stuff. You always find a way. Like that.
And lastly, and most importantly, what's one thing people should do differently after listening to this episode?
Well, I think it's maybe around that brand stretch piece. So think about how well your brand is set up to stretch. Because once you've nailed your current proposition, your current offering, you've got your product market fit, that's where you're going to have to go next. So how well is it set up to stretch? And as I say, you need to get beyond those first kind of attributes that are important to the start of your success in order to create a platform to move forward from.
Charlotte, thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed this conversation.
Scratch is a production of Rival. We are a marketing innovation consultancy that helps businesses develop strategies and capabilities to grow faster. If you want to learn more about us, check out wearerival.com. If you want to connect with me, email me at eric@wearerival.com or find me on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, share with anyone you think might enjoy it, and please do leave us a review. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.